He was despised, wounded because of our sins. By his bruises, we were healed. Most people in the Western world hear these words from Isaiah 53 and immediately think of one person, Jesus of Nazareth. But the original author may not have been writing about an individual at all. The he in this passage may actually be a they, an entire nation, and understanding that changes everything about how we read one of the most influential passages ever written. To understand who this servant really is, we need to go back to one of the darkest moments in Israel's history. In 587 BCE, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, razed Solomon's temple, and deported Judah's elite population. The Davidic monarchy, the dynasty God had promised would rule forever, was gone. The priesthood was displaced. Everything that defined Israel's covenant relationship with God had been shattered. In the aftermath of this catastrophe, an anonymous prophet began composing what scholars call Second Isaiah, chapters 40 through 55 of the book of Isaiah. This is not the same author as chapters 1 through 39, which date to the 8th century. Second Isaiah is a distinct literary work written during or just after the Babylonian exile, addressed to a shattered people desperate for meaning. Within Second Isaiah, scholars have identified 4 passages known as the servant songs, poems about a mysterious servant figure. They appear in chapters 42, 49, 50, and 52 through 53. Each song builds on the last. The first song introduces the servant's mission to bring justice to the nations and serve as a light of nations. The second song names the servant explicitly. Isaiah 49:3 states, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I glory." The third song describes persecution, the servant offering his back to floggers. And the fourth song, the famous passage in chapters 52 and 53, describes suffering, death-like humiliation, and ultimate vindication. The phrase Israel, my servant, appears approximately 8 times throughout Second Isaiah. This is not a minor detail buried in a footnote. It's a recurring identification woven through the entire text. And when people object that the servant is described as an individual, not a group, the answer lies in how ancient Hebrew poetry works. Personification of nations is extremely common. Israel is called daughter Zion. Rachel weeps for her children as a stand-in for the nation. Collective and individual imagery coexist without contradiction. That's poetry, not philosophy. Now here's the critical interpretive key to Isaiah 53. Look at who's speaking. In chapter 52, verse 15, the text introduces the speakers. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. The voices we hear in chapter 53 belong to the nations and their kings. When they say, "He was wounded because of our sins," the "our" refers to the nation's sins, not Israel's. And the nations are confessing that Israel's suffering was caused by their aggression. And through witnessing Israel's faithfulness under persecution, they have come to recognize Yahweh. This completely reframes the passage. It's not about one person dying for sinners. It's about an entire people suffering, opening the world's eyes to God. But this reading isn't without its complications. The biggest one, in Isaiah 49 verse 5, the servant appears to have a mission to bring Jacob, that is Israel, back to God. If the servant is Israel, how can Israel have a mission to itself? The resolution lies in prophetic rhetoric. Prophets regularly divided Israel into a faithful remnant and a wayward majority, so the righteous portion bears a mission to the whole. But across all 4 songs, the dominant motif is the servant's mission to the world. Now for the theological heart of this text. Before the exile, Israel's covenant structure worked like this. God made a covenant with the Davidic king, as recorded in 2 Samuel 7. The king, along with priests and prophets, mediated between God and the people of Israel. It was a national arrangement with a royal center, and the exile destroyed that structure. There was no more king, no more temple, no more functioning priesthood. And second Isaiah's response was extraordinary. In chapter 55, verses 3 through 5, God declares, I will make with you an everlasting covenant, the enduring loyalty promised to David. The covenant once made with the king is now transferred to the entire people. Israel herself takes on the roles of king, priest, and prophet, but on a global stage. This is the birth of universal mission in Israelite theology. Before the exile, Yahweh was Israel's God and Israel was Yahweh's people. The relationship was particular: one God, one nation. Second Isaiah shatters that boundary. Israel's vocation is no longer just to worship Yahweh, but to make Yahweh known to all peoples. The servant is called a light of nations, not a light for Israel alone. The suffering of exile becomes the mechanism through which the nations encounter the God of Israel. Israel mediates between God and the entire world. The covenant has gone global. A brief note on later reinterpretation. Early followers of Jesus identified him with the suffering servant, and the New Testament writers drew heavily on Isaiah 53 to construct their passion narratives. Paul extended the servant identity to all Christians. These are legitimate theological readings within their own traditions, but they are reinterpretations, not the original meaning. The anonymous prophet of second Isaiah was writing about the lived experience of exile, not about events 5 centuries in the future. So what does all of this add up to? Something truly extraordinary. Second Isaiah represents one of the most remarkable theological achievements in the Hebrew Bible. This anonymous poet took the worst catastrophe in Israel's history, the destruction of everything that made Israel Israel, and transformed it into a story of cosmic purpose. Israel's suffering is not punishment alone, it is vocation. The exile didn't destroy Israel's relationship with God. It expanded that relationship from a national covenant to a universal mission. Suffering becomes the very means by which the world comes to know the God of Israel. This idea that suffering can be redemptive, that a people's pain can serve a larger divine purpose, that the knowledge of God is meant for all humanity, became one of the most influential ideas in Western civilization. It shaped Judaism's enduring self-understanding as a people with a mission to the world. It provided the theological vocabulary that early Christians used to interpret the death of Jesus, and it planted the seed of universalism in monotheistic religion, the conviction that one God means one humanity, and that the boundaries between peoples are not ultimate. In the ruins of Jerusalem, surrounded by the wreckage of a destroyed temple and a shattered monarchy, an anonymous poet looked at a broken, humiliated people and saw not the end of a story, but the beginning of a bigger one. A story in which Israel's wounds would become the world's healing. Second Isaiah took a people who had lost everything: king, temple, land, dignity, and gave them something no empire could destroy: a purpose. Not just to survive, but to serve. Not just to endure, but to illuminate, a light of nations burning brightest in the dark.